Hi, my name is Dr. Sanjay Popat and I'm a chartered organisational psychologist specialising in work stress and burnout. And I'd like to talk about how people make sense of stress and why this is important at work. So my research looked at how junior doctors experience stress over time. And I found that the consequences of stress can depend on how people make sense of situations. When doctors were tracked over time, many of them tended to take one of two pathways, what I've called the functional sense-making pathway and the dysfunctional sense-making pathway. So what do I actually mean by sense-making? You see, we all have conscious and unconscious assumptions. Assumptions about ourselves, about the world, and about other people. And these assumptions serve as predictions about what we may expect to encounter in the future. Psychologists call these assumptions schemas. They're templates based on prior experience. It's your mind's way of saying, we've come across this before, and here's the basic blueprint. But sometimes we experience things that cannot be explained by those schemas. Put differently, we experience things that surprise us. This triggers a need for explanation, known as sense-making, a search for interpretation or meaning about those surprises, until eventually our schemas are updated to account for that puzzling event and ambiguity. Let's take the example of patient death. Many junior doctors found their first experience of patient death stressful, as you might expect. However, some trainees then went on to give meaning to patient death in a functional way. For instance, everyone has to die at some point, but I'm fortunate enough to help these people in their last few days of their life. This then acted as a lens through which these doctors viewed patient death moving forward, and so actually stress tended to reduce over time. Whereas for other junior doctors, they gave meaning to patient death in a dysfunctional way. For instance, I'm no good at my job. If I was better, less people would be dying. This belief then rationalized how they viewed new situations involving patient death, leading to vicious cycles of stress. It's pretty striking then that our jobs have the power to change our beliefs in such a way as to alter how we react to future events. We therefore need to identify negative schemas to make sure our health isn't being adversely affected. Now, identifying schemas isn't as easy as it sounds, especially as they often operate under our conscious awareness. But pay attention to uncomfortable feelings, especially if these are recurrent. Do you notice any connection in between the episodes that you're experiencing distress? Perhaps it's around certain colleagues, on certain shifts, or doing certain tasks. Sometimes this kind of reflection can guide you to the source of the schema, whether that centers around inadequacy, perfectionism, or even how others view you. Remember that irrational schemas are often in absolute terms and are very black and white. For instance, I'm never good enough. Other times, just knowing if the schema is to do with yourself, other people, or the world can be a good starting point. If we are able to identify the schema, it's important to recognize that very rarely are things in this world black and white. They are usually complex shades of grey. So we need to try and add shadings to our all or nothing thinking. I find that evidence logs are really helpful here. This is simply a piece of paper with the schema at the top of the page. For example, I'm never good enough, and a column, evidence that challenges that schema. Go about a week in your life and try to fill in this log. What we tend to notice is that people notice a lot of things that contradict the schema which they weren't aware of previously. Of course, distortions in thinking may still persist, so showing this log to a friend, a colleague, or supervisor you trust can be beneficial, because they may alert you to small pieces of evidence that you've dismissed. They may ask simple questions to help you evaluate the evidence and also to consider alternative explanations. For instance, maybe a doctor updates a family member on their relative's condition. They do so clearly, competently, and calmly, but they later ignore this because their patient then deteriorated. Evidence like this may help replace "I'm never good enough" with "some days I'm better at my job than others." And to be clear, I'm not suggesting you or your colleagues replace the role of a therapist who will work with you to identify and challenge schemas. But colleagues, friends, and supervisors are well placed because they know the environment you operate in, and also your colleagues and supervisors know the environment that you work in. Hi, my name is Dr. Sanjay Popat, and I'm a chartered organisational psychologist specialising in work stress and burnout. You can find me on Instagram at Dr._Sanjay Popat, or LinkedIn at Sanjay Popat, or my website www.wellbeingforworkplaces.com. Stay tuned for all my upcoming content with MindFriend.